In the winter of 1973, the Long Beach Sports Arena held 4,200 seats. On the evening of December 11th, every one of them was filled. The temperature inside the building had climbed to 81 degrees by 7 o'clock. Pushed up by the weight of bodies and the heat of portable stage lights trained on the competition floor. The floor itself was a square of blue foam matting 40 feet across, bordered by white tape on all four sides. Outside that tape, in folding chairs arranged in a tight horseshoe, sat the judges. They had scorecards, they had pens. Before the night was over, they would not need either of them. His name was Roland Voss. He was 24 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, and 211 pounds of precisely conditioned muscle. He had been competing in full-contact kickboxing since he was 17, and in 7 years he had not lost a single sanctioned bout, not one. His record stood at 31 wins, with 22 of those by knockout. He had won regional titles in California, Nevada, and Oregon. He had been featured that same autumn in a 2-page spread inside Black Belt magazine, photographed with his arms crossed and his chin level, beneath a headline that read, "The Future of American Kickboxing." His trainer, a former Korean military combatives instructor named Park Sung-jin, had said publicly and on the record that Roland Voss was the most technically complete kickboxer he had ever produced. Park had produced 11 national competitors in his career. He was not a man given to exaggeration. In the next 31 seconds, Roland Voss would challenge a man he had never met. In the next 47 seconds after that, 4,200 people would witness something they would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe accurately. Most of them would fail. The story would travel through dojos and tournament programs and late conversations at the edges of mats in gyms across 3 countries, and it would collect details it had never owned and lose details it could never afford to lose. But the center of it would survive intact, because the men who were closest to it were men who had trained themselves to see precisely, and what they saw that night was not something that could be revised by memory. Nobody in that arena understood yet that they were about to watch a lesson being taught. And nobody, least of all Roland Voss, understood who the teacher was. Roland had entered the arena the way champions enter every arena, ahead of the crowd's full attention, but aware that it was assembling behind him like a tide. He had warmed up for 40 minutes in a back corridor with his trainer and 2 of his training partners, working combinations on the pads until his forearms were warm and his footwork had loosened to its natural rhythm. He was not nervous. He had not been nervous before a fight since he was 19, and that nervousness had been knocked out of him in a gym in Sacramento on a Tuesday afternoon by a featherweight Thai boxer who outweighed him by nothing and outworked him by everything. He had learned from that afternoon. He had not forgotten it. By the time he emerged onto the main floor, the card was 2 bouts in. The crowd had settled. The judges had their routines. The tournament director, a heavy-set man named Gerald Fitzpatrick who had been running Pacific Coast competition events since 1965, was standing at the corner of the mat with a clipboard held against his chest, reviewing the bracket. Gerald had seen a great deal in 8 years of tournament work. He was not easily moved by what happened on the mat. He would be moved tonight. Roland's semi-final bout lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. His opponent was a 2-time regional champion from Fresno, a southpaw named Davis who threw a high left roundhouse that had stopped 7 men in competition. Roland walked through it the way a man walks through a screen door. He countered with a right body kick that dropped Davis to the mat at the 2-minute mark, gave him time to recover, and finished the bout with a combination that the judges scored unanimously in the 3rd exchange. Davis stood at the end, shook Roland's hand and sat down on the bench with his head lowered. He did not look up for a long time. That was Roland Voss in competition. Patient, exact, thorough. His technique was not flashy. It did not need to be. A fight is not a performance. Roland understood that. A fight is a problem to be solved, and Roland solved problems with an engineer's economy. Nothing wasted. Nothing repeated unnecessarily. Everything placed where the mathematics of the body dictated it should go. After his bout, he took a towel from his trainer and stood near the edge of the mat, watching the next pair work through their exchange. The arena had begun to fill toward its upper sections. A crowd for the finals was different from a crowd for the early rounds. The people in the upper sections were not students of the art. They were there for the spectacle of resolution. Roland was used to them. It was during the intermission between the semi-finals and the finals that it happened. There was a man sitting in the fourth row of the east section, close enough to the mat that he could have reached out and touched the border tape from where he sat. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and dark trousers. He had a cap on his head, pulled low enough that the brim sat above his eyebrows without calling attention. He was not a large man in the way that Roland Voss was a large man. He was somewhere in his early 30s. He had the kind of stillness that reads in a crowd not as anonymity but as the specific absence of performance. Most people in a crowd are doing something with their bodies. Adjusting, leaning, turning. This man was simply present, with his hands folded in his lap, watching the mat with the quiet attention of someone who has spent so much time in rooms like this one that the room itself requires nothing more from him. He had arrived at the arena at 6:15 with two other men, and the three of them had taken seats together without announcement. The two men with him were not small, but they had arranged themselves beside him with an orientation that any trained observer would have recognized as deference. They were not accompanying him the way friends accompany a friend. They were accompanying him the way students accompany a teacher. His name was Chuck Norris. He held black belts in Tang Soo Do, Judo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He had been a two-time world professional middleweight karate champion. He had trained with and against the best fighters in the United States and abroad for 15 years. He had fought in front of crowds and behind closed gym doors and in military settings that would not appear on any public record. He was 33 years old and he weighed 174 pounds. And he had come to Long Beach that evening to watch competition, which was something he did often and without announcement, the way a surgeon attends operations that are not his own. Roland Voss did not know any of this. What Roland knew was what someone had told him at the side of the mat during the intermission, that the man in the fourth row was a karate guy who made movies. Roland's training partner had said it with a small smile, the way people say things they consider to be mildly amusing. A movie karate guy. Roland had looked across the mat to the fourth row, and he had seen a man in a gray shirt who did not look like anything in particular, and something in Roland that was not reason but was older than reason, had made a calculation that reason would not have approved. He should not have picked up the microphone. The microphone was Gerald Fitzpatrick's microphone, used to announce bouts and introduce judges, and it was resting in its stand at the corner of the mat during the intermission, and Roland should not have reached for it. His trainer would say afterward that he saw Roland reach for it and did not move quickly enough to prevent it, and that he had regretted those 2 seconds every year since. Roland Voss took the microphone. He was still carrying his tournament energy, the compound of adrenaline and public validation that competition produces in men who have competed successfully for a long time. He was speaking before he had fully decided what he was going to say, which is the condition that produces most of the sentences men spend the rest of their lives regretting. He said into a microphone connected to a public address system in a room holding 4,200 people that he understood there was a Hollywood karate man in the building tonight. He said that Hollywood karate and real karate were two different things, and that if the gentleman in the gray shirt wanted to find out the difference, Roland Voss was available. He said, in the exact words that would follow him for the remainder of his career, that the man in the gray shirt would not last one round. The arena went quiet the way arenas go quiet when something has happened that nobody expected, and nobody is immediately sure how to classify. Roland set the microphone back in its stand. He stood at the center of the mat with his arms loose at his sides and his weight balanced, and he looked across the floor to the fourth row of the east section. 4,200 people turned. If you want to know what happens next, make sure you are subscribed and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. This channel exists because of people who stay till the end, and what happens in the next 6 minutes on that mat is exactly why. The man in the fourth row did not stand immediately. He sat for a moment longer, with his hands in his lap, and he looked at the mat. Those who were close enough to see his face in that interval reported later that his expression did not change. Not tightening. Not loosening, the specific quality of absolute absence of surprise. Then he removed his cap. He folded it once along the brim precisely and set it on the seat beside him. He stood up. He walked to the edge of the mat. He removed his shoes, setting them side by side at the border tape. He stepped onto the blue foam without hurrying, and he walked to the center of the floor and he stopped. He looked at Roland Voss with the attention of a man who is reading something carefully. He said nothing. Gerald Fitzpatrick, at the corner of the mat, had set his clipboard down. Both of his hands were flat on the table beside him. He had been running martial arts tournaments for 8 years. He had seen unexpected things on competition floors. What he was watching now was of a different category, and some part of him understood that before anything had yet occurred, and he did not pick up the clipboard again for 11 minutes. The two men who had come with Chuck Norris had gone very still in their seats. The man sitting directly to the right of their empty third seat, a judo instructor from Torrance named Matsumoto Kenji, who had placed second in the 1971 national championships, would say later that he knew within the first 3 seconds of Chuck Norris standing on the mat what was going to happen, and that what he felt was not excitement but something closer to the specific solemnity one feels witnessing an irreversible thing. In the fourth row, in the seat where Chuck Norris had been sitting, his folded cap sat on the gray plastic of the chair, and the overhead light fell on it without interest. The way light falls on everything and nothing equally. Roland Voss had 4 inches and 37 pounds on the man standing across the mat from him. He was 7 years younger. He had competed 31 times in sanctioned full contact bouts and had not been defeated. He had every measurable advantage that the mathematics of competition recognize as meaningful. All of this was true, and all of it was, in the next 47 seconds, going to become irrelevant. A fight is not two men colliding. A fight is a negotiation about distance, and distance is not measured in feet, it is measured in attention. The man who controls what the other man does with his attention controls the fight before the first technique is thrown. Chuck Norris understood this not as a principle he had learned but as a fact he had confirmed so many times, in so many different rooms, that it no longer required his conscious consideration. It was simply available to him, the way balance is available to a man who has walked long enough. Roland moved first. Second one. Roland closed the distance with a lead leg side kick aimed at the midsection, thrown with the full extension of a technique he had thrown in competition dozens of times. It was a good kick. It was precisely executed. It arrived at the place where a midsection had been, and found nothing. Chuck Norris had moved 4 inches to his right, not back, not away, sideways, 4 inches, at the moment of commitment, which left Roland's kick extended into empty air, and left his weight forward, and his center temporarily displaced. Second 3. Roland recovered and came back with a right cross because that is what technique dictates when a kick has been slipped at that angle and the weight is returning forward. The punch was fast. His punches were always fast. His trainer had timed his right cross at 31 milliseconds of extension from guard. It was one of his genuine advantages in competition. The punch landed on nothing. Chuck Norris had turned his shoulder and the cross had passed outside it by a measurement too small for the human eye to confirm at distance, and then Chuck Norris's left hand came up, not hard, not as a strike, but as an interruption. The back of his forearm met Roland's extended arm at the elbow and redirected it downward. And for the first time Roland's balance was not where Roland expected it to be. Gerald Fitzpatrick's hands pressed harder against the table. In the third row, a woman who had come to support her son in the earlier bouts reached out and took hold of the arm of the man sitting next to her, who was a stranger to her, and the stranger did not notice, because he was not looking anywhere except the mat. Second 7. Roland threw the left hook. This was his finishing technique. This was the punch that had ended 11 of his 22 knockout victories. He threw it with everything he had because by this point something had communicated itself to his nervous system that his conscious mind had not yet processed, and the response of his nervous system was to escalate. The hook came in wide and fast and certain. Chuck Norris dropped 3 inches at the knees. The hook traveled over his right shoulder. He did not stop. He did not pause. From the crouched position his right hand was already moving, and it stopped precisely, held 1 inch from Roland Voss's left temple, knuckles forward, the geometry of it exact and complete, a technique fully committed, fully accurate, and fully withheld. Roland Voss went still, not from impact. There had been no impact. He went still because the fist was there, 1 inch from his temple, and he understood the arithmetic of what had just occurred with the clarity that only that proximity can produce. He understood that he had thrown his 3 best techniques in escalating sequence, and that the man in the gray t-shirt had made each of them irrelevant, not by outworking him, but by being somewhere slightly different from where Roland's training and instinct had calculated he would be. He understood that what separated the present moment from a different version of the present moment was the willingness of the man in front of him. Chuck Norris lowered his hand. He stepped back once. He extended his right hand, open, palm up at the height of Roland's sternum. He looked at Roland Voss with the specific and unhurried attention of a man who has no need for the moment to be anything other than what it is. The arena was absolutely silent. Matsumoto Kenji, in the 4th row, pressed his right hand briefly to the empty seat beside him. He would say later that he did not know exactly why he did it, except that it felt like the appropriate response to witnessing something complete. What Chuck Norris said to Roland Voss in that silence, in those 2 seconds with his hand extended, and the arena holding its breath around them, has been reported differently by the people who claim to have heard it. The mat was large and the arena was loud in its quiet, and lip reading at 40 feet is not a reliable science. What most accounts agree on is that it was short, 1 sentence, or possibly 2. That it was said without cruelty and without theater. That whatever it was, Roland Voss heard it. Roland stood at the fork in the road. Every man who has ever been definitively and publicly corrected stands at this fork, and the choice made there is the choice that defines the rest of the story. The fork is not complicated. One path leads through the acknowledgement of what has occurred. The other path leads away from it, through the territory of careful construction, of reasons and contexts, and the quiet reassignment of what happened to something that happened for other reasons. Roland Voss stood there for 3 seconds. Then he took Chuck Norris's hand. He shook it once, and he held it, and he said something back. He was not smiling. He was not performing contrition. What he said was said to the man in front of him, and not to the room. And the men who were closest reported afterward that his face in that moment had the specific quality of a man who has just paid an expensive debt, and discovered that the paying of it is not the loss he had anticipated. The arena released its breath all at once, and the sound that came out of 4,200 people was not cheering in the ordinary sense. It was something older and less organized than cheering. It was the sound of people who have witnessed something they recognize as true. Chuck Norris walked off the mat. He picked up his shoes at the border tape. He walked back to the 4th row and picked up his cap from the gray plastic seat and put it on. And he sat down. He folded his hands in his lap. He watched the next bout. The stunt coordinator, who had been sitting 8 rows back, and who had recognized Chuck Norris within 30 seconds of the man sitting down that evening, stood up from his chair and made his way along the row and down the aisle steps to the 4th row. And he placed his hand briefly on Chuck Norris's shoulder as he passed. He did not say anything. Chuck Norris did not acknowledge it. But he did not move away from it, either. He stayed still under it for the moment that it rested there, the way a man stays still under the acknowledgement of something that does not need to be converted into language. Gerald Fitzpatrick picked up his clipboard. He looked at it for a moment. Then he set it back down on the table, because he understood that the next several minutes were going to require a different kind of attention than a clipboard is designed to organize. The story left the Long Beach Sports Arena that evening in the pockets of 4,200 people, and it traveled the way stories travel when they are carried by people who understand what they saw. It went into dojos in the San Fernando Valley and competition programs in the Pacific Northwest and late-night conversations at the margins of sparring sessions in gyms from Sacramento to Vancouver. It collected speed in the telling, the way authentic things do, because the center of it was not complicated and not resolvable into something smaller than itself. A champion, undefeated, had extended a public challenge to a quiet man in a gray shirt. The quiet man had answered it with a technique completed to the inch of its conclusion, and withheld at the exact moment of its success, and had then offered his hand in the silence. Some versions of the story gained details the evening had not contained. Some versions placed the arena in Los Angeles. Some changed the duration, some added a second challenger who had stepped forward and then stepped back. All of these additions were the work of the distance between witness and telling, which is a distance that grows at a rate proportional to how much the story matters to the people carrying it. What did not change, in any version, in any gym, in any decade of the story's life, was the image at the center of it. The fist stopped 1 inch from the temple. The hand, offered open in the silence that followed. The choice that Roland Voss made at the fork in the road. Matsumoto Kenji told the story 18 times in his career as a competition instructor, always at the same point in a student's development, the point at which the student began to confuse technical proficiency with complete understanding. He told it not as a cautionary lesson, and not as a legend, but as a description of a thing that had happened. Because he had been in the fourth row and he had seen it with the attention of a man who has trained himself to see precisely, and what he had seen was precise. Roland Voss competed for 4 more years after Long Beach. He won 14 additional bouts. He retired in 1977 with a record that still stands as one of the most complete in the early history of American full-contact kickboxing. He became a trainer. Several of his students became national competitors. He was known in the gyms where he taught as a man of unusual patience with beginners, and as a man who said when asked about the composition of a real fighter, that the technical ability to land a technique is a separate matter from the understanding of when and how a technique should be used. He said this without reference to Long Beach. He did not need to reference it. The men who trained with him long enough came to understand that it was the sentence underneath everything he taught. Chuck Norris left the Long Beach sports arena that evening at 9:45, after the finals were complete. He walked out through the same doors he had walked in through, and he got into a car. And he drove north on the 405, and the lights of the city fell across the windshield with the indifference of lights that have no knowledge of what has occurred below them. What this story carries is not what most people take from it on first hearing. It is not a story about outcome. The outcome was determined before the second technique, and the men on the mat understood that before most of the audience did. What the story carries is a proposition about the relationship between certainty and preparation. Roland Voss was certain. His certainty was built from 31 consecutive confirmations that what he understood about fighting was sufficient. Certainty built from evidence is not the same thing as certainty built from understanding, and the difference between the two only becomes visible at the moment when the evidence encounters something it was not the correct preparation for. The man who knows how much he does not know is harder to defeat than the man who has mapped the edges of what he does. This is not a comfort to the man who discovers it at the center of an arena, but it is the truth that survives when everything else has been revised by time and distance and the mutating work of memory. Next week, we are going to talk about the evening in 1975, when a decorated Green Beret walked onto the mat at a private demonstration in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, looked at Chuck Norris across 12 feet of gymnasium floor, and said 4 words that nobody in that room was prepared to hear. What happened in the next 20 seconds changed how the United States military thought about hand-to-hand combat instruction for the next decade. Stay where you are.